World War II will forever be remembered for brutal frontline assaults that changed the lives of its more than 120 million combatants. But away from the deafening horrors of the front, there are many forgotten atrocities that helped define those 6 long years for hundreds of thousands of women. Today on Sketchy Toons, we're going to explore the most painful punishments Nazis did to female prisoners. Like their male counterparts, female prisoners were subjected to unimaginable labor practices, many of which led to their deaths. Women who were being held in Poland at the Plaszow camp were forced to pull massive dump cars filled with stones in the camp quarry. More than a dozen women would be made to form a line on either side of the track, grab one of the provided ropes, and be forced to pull the car along the tracks like disposable beasts of burden. The struggle would last for several hours a day, and anyone who couldn't take the relentless mental and physical exhaustion would be removed from the line and replaced by someone who could keep it moving. Others who were lucky enough to be spared the rope were forced to carry large stones out of the quarries. At the Mauthausen camp in Austria, women were forced to climb a series of 186 steps to reach the top of the quarry. It was an unimaginable horror brought to life, and for many of the prisoners, it defined their final hours. Injuries were a common occurrence, since none of them were built for such a strenuous task. No one was offered significant medical care, if they got any attention at all. Not only that, they were denied proper nourishment, clothing, and adequate places to rest before the next day's punishment. The mental exhaustion this caused perpetuated the cycle of physical debilitation, and for many, it meant an unceremonious death, and they became nothing more than a statistic to their uncaring overlords. Those who were lucky enough to escape slaving away in the quarries were forced to sort through clothing that was confiscated from raided homes, and even pulled from the bodies of the dead. When their daily duties were over, women from more than 30 different countries, of all ages, races, and religions, were crammed into deliberately overcrowded blocks in an effort to make life as uncomfortable at night as it was during the day. Survivors have testified about the condition of some of the blocks, saying, "A power plant had been destroyed in the bombing, and we'd been without electricity for several days. In the dark, the cold, in silence, mothers come to check that their babies are still alive." The Nazis also hoped it spread enough hatred for one another that it would remove the possibility of a united front and rebellion. That added an aspect of psychological torture to their existence that set the stage for a lot more. Being mentally and spiritually beaten down made it easier for Nazi guards and soldiers to use female prisoners as nothing more than physical objects to molest at their whim. Being forced to shave their body hair, to be nude, and to be subjected to cavity searches were common forms of psychological torture used to break their will and make it easier to assault them without a fight. As they arrived at the camps, female prisoners were lined up, and their heads, armpits, and public areas were shaved as part of the defeminization process. Not only was the shaving of their bodies physically and mentally mortifying, for many of the women, their hair held spiritual and religious significance that took the humiliation to unthinkable levels of degradation. As part of Jewish tradition, women kept their hair covered in public after marriage, so they suffered nakedness on multiple levels. Survivors have described the experience as being treated like sheep in an assembly line shearing process, leaving their exposed body parts scorching from being blasted by disinfectant, and being not only defeminized, but left transformed into an undiscovered gender that was neither male nor female. They were forced to take public baths after having their hair sheared by machines, And though a survival instinct kicked in for many, it was quickly beaten out of them. And not just with fists or batons. Their breasts would be grabbed, twisted, and used to force them in whatever direction the guards wanted. Sometimes vicious dogs would be let loose to attack a woman to send a stronger message. The women behind them were less inclined to fight back after witnessing the brutality. And it wasn't just men who were inflicting the punishments. Many of the guards were women. Each female guard had to take a special training course at the Ravensbrück camp. They were referred to as the SS Aufseherinnen, and their main priority was to maintain complete control over the women in the camp, and then ensure that they were getting as much effective labor from them as possible. That type of psychological warfare is impossible for anyone who's never experienced it to understand. Just like the men who danced between mortars that rained from the skies on the beaches of Normandy, having to stand in front of male officers, and sometimes their own children, for hours on end after the procedure was only the beginning. Everyone was now locked into their way of life. They were either perpetrator or victim, and the extremes grew by the day. What followed is beyond the imagination of even the most depraved creatures. Forced body cavity searches were part of the routine. Medical examinations, whippings, beatings, and other demoralizing intrusions were part of standard procedure. Imagine having an audience every time you had to relieve yourself at the latrine, and it got worse than that. Prisoners weren't provided with any sanitary napkins during their menstrual cycle and were forced to stand before the prison guards during roll call with blood flowing down their legs, adding to the already dried blood that accumulated. The guards would force them to wash the blood from their skin, and their skirts became little more than crimson bandages. Eventually, many female prisoners would lose their ability to menstruate due to a lack of proper nutrition, and that elevated their fears to even greater heights. Living with the constant worry that they'd become infertile added a level of violence to the humiliation ritual that's almost beyond comprehension. And for many women, that fear became a cruel reality. Considering many of the women were already mothers, and many more were hopeful to be someday, the most cherished wish of their existence was stripped from them, all for the enjoyment of the inhumane monsters who were given free rein to do as they pleased. Not only would they have to worry about their existing and future children, they also had to consider what may happen to their marriage should they not be able to grow or start a family for their husbands. Imagine trying to explain that degree of pain and suffering to your own family, let alone a doctor, to heal in the future. Even when they were alone at night, unrelenting stress meant that the attacks never stopped. Human beings can't be subjected to that level of constant mental distress without it also causing harm to their physical well-being. And for many women, this torment lasted years and stripped them of any hope of feeling like a human being ever again. Even doctors and medical researchers followed the same basic protocol as the prison guards. Use the women to find the limits of the human body and mind. Although the medical wing of the Nazi regime was looking for permanent solutions to the existence of the impure races. One of the main goals of their medical experiments was to create and perfect a human sterilization process. To perfect it meant that it would have to be efficient and cheap, and Nazi death doctors used the Auschwitz and Ravensbrück camps as their primary source for unwilling test patients. A mass sterilization policy was in effect in many Nazi-controlled hospitals and institutions from 1933 to 1945. Even women who managed to avoid that program would have a hard time staying off the reproduction radar. More than 500 brothels were established by the German army, and women were forced to prostitute themselves. So there was a high likelihood that women who could get pregnant would. Many of the men who visited the brothels were under the influence of alcohol, and that led to an even more depraved environment to the women who were forced to offer themselves. Nearly 35,000 women are documented as being trafficked during Hitler's reign of terror. The brothels would be frequented by German soldiers, Nazi SS, capos, and even male prisoners who were awarded with vouchers for hard work at the camp. As you can imagine, that had murderous consequences. If German race experts determined that a child could not be Germanized based on who the mother or father were, they would likely be forced to abort the pregnancy. Those who escaped that fate and were allowed to give birth would have to do so in ill-equipped, makeshift nurseries that all but assured their baby wouldn't survive. A third option would be for the mother and child to be sent back to the region they came from, without food or medical care, and the result would be the same. But the experiments went much deeper into trying to recreate humanity than that. Drugs were developed in the search for treatment methods for injuries and illnesses suffered by German military personnel, and female prisoners were used to test many of those drugs. At the Sachsenhausen, Dachau, Natzweiler, Buchenwald, and Neuengamme camps, women were injected with immunization compounds and antibodies that Nazi doctors hoped would prevent and treat several contagious diseases. In case that wasn't enough, female inmates at the Natzweiler and Sachsenhausen camps were also exposed to phosgene and mustard gas in order to test possible antidotes. They were used as guinea pigs to test potential treatments for malaria, typhus, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, yellow fever, and infectious hepatitis. At the Ravensbrück camp, bone grafting experiments were conducted, and new drugs developed to hopefully be used as antibiotics were tested. Some of the nightmarish tests were carried out only using prostitution and no drugs at all. Heinrich Himmler believed that gay inmates could be cured if they were forced to have intercourse with female inmates. The only limit to the horror was the imagination of the monster conducting the tests. Considering the effect that Nazi techniques had on adults, the impact they had on children is impossible to fully understand. Any children admitted to the camps would be registered under the same number as their mother. That's right. Even their names were taken to make sure they were fully stripped of their identity. Children shared a number with their mother because they'd soon be separated and held in separate children's blocks. Even more chilling was the fact that many women who entered the camps with children were immediately marked for death. They'd be reunited in the gas chambers. Some of the most horrific stories detail Nazi nurses working at the Ravensbrück camp carrying deceased children in sacks headed to the morgue. Without historical references, these would be impossible stories to believe, beyond the depravity of the most imaginative Hollywood scriptwriters. But one of those nurses provided a chilling admission. The first time I had to take the tiny bodies to the morgue, I felt as though I was descending into hell. The first time I went down those stairs with 3 babies in my arms, I was in tears. I didn't know where to put them. In the end, I laid them in the arms of a dead woman as if she were their mother. It makes sense that this admission would come from someone from the Ravensbrück camp, as it contained more female slaves than any other camp. The camp was located 50 miles north of Berlin, and conservative estimates claim that there were more than 50,000 women there. Some estimates claim there were as many as 100,000. Luckily, many of the survivors have found the bravery to tell their stories. Hearing the true horrors helps assure there won't be a next time.